already to speed up analysis, but there are always one-off tools that an analyst may want to write for themselves or their team. So to the right there, you'll see usages that we at our own office have for programming with the FEMAP API, and then some corresponding examples by the usage category. We'll use the API for the purpose of checking models against rules, requirements, such as model building best practice procedures. One example of that is ensuring that all model nodes are defined with a particular coordinate system. And then there are two other potential usages given there, such as extending functionality or speeding up the modeling process. That will be highlighted by the demonstrations I'll provide to you next. So for the first demo, we'll cover a scenario where we have to check a simple model with some non-rectangular features that has previously been meshed. And that has resulted in some triangle elements being produced by the auto mesher, as you can see in the graphics window there. So our goal here for this demo is to create a group with all of the existing triangle elements from the API. And many analysts may already know, why would we do that? Well, a triangle element is not going to be as accurate as a quad. It's artificially stiffer, and so the analyst may want a tool to help pinpoint all of those in order to see where mesh modifications may be necessary. So I'm going to fire up the API programming window from within FEMAP here, and you'll notice in the window we immediately have some code that's sort of pre-written for us, put right in there by FEMAP. And this is those two lines, the dim app as FEMAP.model and set app equal to FEMAP. That's what defines the FEMAP application object and then connects the code to the current FEMAP session. Next, we'll declare and initialize a set to hold the list of triangle element IDs. Think of a set as a list or bucket of numbers, and we use various methods to programmatically isolate IDs and then put them into these sets for later processing. In this case, it will be added to a group that we're trying to create through code. So next we'll declare and initialize a group. Note that this doesn't yet create a FEMAP group. This is just a group object. Okay, small correction there. We'll go ahead and use the add rule method of the set object and narrow down selected model elements to only those of a certain shape. And that's why we're using this FGD elem by shape argument for the add rule method. And then as we're looking for three-noded triangles, we're using the FTO TRIA3 argument of this add rule method. So using these two particular inputs to the method in this way, we'll add all triangle element IDs to the elem set object, and our list is done. It's that simple to add elements of this type using the rules. Next, we'll create a variable to store an ID for the group that we've created. And the next empty ID method of the group object returns the next available group ID in the model. And we'll use that for the new group. This will just be ones as we don't have any existing groups in the model. But if there was a group with a number 1, it would automatically place it into ID 2. Okay, this will be important when we go to save the new group to the model. So then we will go ahead and add the set IDs to the group that we found before, noting that the IDs are associated with elements because, as I said, it was just a list that we have before in our set. Okay. Lastly, we'll create a title for that new group and then place that group in the database. So the .title method and then the .put method will help us do that. So the .put will save the group to the database using the ID found as the next empty ID. So I'll go ahead and click play here to show how that worked out. All right, so as you can see, I've got a new group available to me with the title as we defined, and I'll go ahead and highlight those elements, and you'll see that it's picked out all of the triangle elements for us in the model. So that's a quick little demo of something that we'd use to check models. And now that we've completed that little script, we're able to do that in a short amount of time, and that should give you guys an idea of the simplicity behind writing this code. All we did was use a handful of methods belonging to just 3 distinct objects, which were the FEMAP application object, the element set, and then the group in order to complete the task. So I'm going to exit out of that, and we'll recycle this model, use it again in another demo with a separate goal in mind. And that would be along the lines of controlling FEMAP from Excel. So what if we wanted to modify the layer of a range of elements using Excel? I'll go ahead and fire up my version of Excel here. And you'll notice that I've got a couple of things defined already. I'll get into that in a second. So it may have been apparent earlier how we were able to get FEMAP to interact with itself, being that we were programming from within its own application. But now we're going to drive FEMAP from Excel. And how this happens functionally is through the COM OLE interface in Windows. But all you need to know is that very little is actually different between programming in the 2 programs, since they're based on a similar coding language. There are just a couple of tricks to getting started in Excel, and that includes creating a macro-enabled worksheet, which I've already done and saved. You can see the file extension up top is .xlsm, and then I've also added the developer tab, which I don't think is added by default with each installation of Excel. So you got to go into the settings and add that. And lastly, I want to add a reference to the FEMAP type library file, which can be found in the installation directory of FEMAP. So I'll show you how to add that real quick, and then I'll talk a little bit about it. So to add that, I'm going to go into this Visual Basic button here, and now I've got the Visual Basic up for Applications window that's popped up. And under Tools References, I can go ahead and scroll down. You should see FEMAP in this list. I've already got it selected, so it's up top here. But you see the FEMAP version 11.1.2 type library has been added as a reference. So I'm hit OK, and now it's been added to this file, and I'm going to exit out of there. And to give you a little background on what the type library affords you, is it includes a list of the objects, properties, and methods from the FEMAP API. And it makes it easier to program in Excel, as you'll get pop-up tooltips, in real time as you program. And the tooltips will give you all available properties and methods related to a particular object, or a parameter list for a method that you may be defining. And that's going to make it very easy to program in Excel. All right, so we're going to go ahead and start that. We're going to create a new macro here. And we're going to call it Modify Layer. Hit Create, and that's going to bring up that window again. So now we're under, now we have the option to start coding for this Modify Layer operation that we're going to do. And first, you'll notice we don't have that code that previously connected us to FEMAP, so we got to insert that ourselves. And so we're going to connect to FEMAP by declaring app as a FEMAP.model, and that's where we're declaring the FEMAP object, and then we're going to connect to it with the set command. And that's a little code snippet that you can recycle. That what this does is connect to a current FEMAP session, this get object line here. So next we're going to create a variable for a return code. Now return code is used by the FEMAP API as a status that is delivered after calling methods to indicate whether or not an operation failed or succeeded. We can't actually call methods without capturing the return code in Excel, although we could in FEMAP, which is why you didn't see that line before. So you'll see that used in the lines below to come. So next we're going to create a set to add a list of elements, to add the list of elements that are going to be moved to the different layer. And again, we're calling this LM set. All right. And then we're going to call the add range method of the element set object. And this is the unique aspect about Excel, which is that we are specifying the low range, the lower bound of the range and the upper bound of the range, and then finally increment using our cells in the Excel file. So you'll notice that I've specified a link to cell 6.1, which is cell A6. So that's our range start, as you can see there, and the range end is in cell B6. So what this is going to do is move elements with IDs between elements of IDs between 4 and 500 onto the new layer. And so next what we're going to do is actually call the modify layer method of the FEMAP application object to enact that change. And it will take in the type of entity being moved, which here is set as FTLM. And FTLM is really just a FEMAP constant. And that can be found in the API reference manual, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. And so FTLM is just specifying the entity type, and then we specify the set ID that has the list of elements that are being moved, which we previously referenced to the range of 4 to 500. And then it also is going to take in as one of the arguments the destination layer ID. So if we hit go on this, I'll go ahead and hit run, and I'll head back to my FEMAP application. You'll see that oops, I actually missed creating the second layer here. So we're going to add that as and so now that I've added a layer, I can actually I'll be able to see the difference it's made. I should see that. Let me go ahead and run on that one again. Let me make sure I've got the right element ID specified. Okay, 2 to 500. Let me double check everything I got on my Excel sheet here. There should be a comma here. Sorry, small error there. All right, so if I run, now I see that everything is moved to the new layer. All the elements between IDs of 4 and 500. So I can see that now I've changed the layer. I've made a change in FEMAP from Excel, which is really handy. And this is just a very basic example of the functionality afforded to you by the FEMAP API. So I'm going to move on to a little more real-world example of a usage for the API. So I'll exit this model, and I'm going to open up another one here. So what you see here is a different model. This is an orthogrid drop test article. As you can see, I hope it's coming in okay for everyone's connections. But what we have here is an orthogrid. So we've got some stiffening members that are orthogonal to each other on a skin, and this is typically some sort of milled out piece of metal. And for this demonstration, what we're going to try to do is demonstrate a script that works by generating and assigning new properties to elements in all the selected groups of the model. So the point of this is to use the API to help me turn each of these orthogrid webs, each of these members that crisscross each other, and turn them into unique property zones. And one use for breaking up the model in this manner is to allow optimization software to uniquely size each property to get as much mass out of the model as possible. All right, so to do this, I first need to create groups, and I'm going to use a generate group operations generate command at FEMAP. I'm going to select all my elements except for this outer ring, and I'm going to differentiate that by just selecting certain properties here. So you can see I've got just these interwebs and skin pockets selected, and I'm hit OK. And I'm going to break this up into different groups by the with this non-manifold edges option, which is going to create a break so that each web segment here is going to be put into its own group. So if I hit OK on that, I've now got 189 groups, and these correspond to each of these little segments here. And the goal of the API that I want to demonstrate is to generate and assign new properties to the elements in this group, all in one click, all for 189 different groups all at once. So I'm going to do that. I've got the API script set up here under my custom tools drop-down menu, and I've called it auto assign properties. So I'm going to run this. I'm going to select, it takes as input all the groups that I created, hit OK, and then it just wants a starting property ID. We'll call it 100. And just like that, it's made each of these different webs, it's assigned the elements of each of these webs into a new property. To be able to better visualize this, I'm going to randomize the color of these webs. And you can see that, wow, I've got a lot more properties than I did before. And I didn't have to go into any property creation menu to do that. The API, this API that I wrote, which is relatively simple, has been able to do that for me. So this should have shown just how quickly an API script can make significant changes to the model and be effective at saving a meaningful amount of time that otherwise would have been lost to repetitive mouse clicks to achieve, the same effect of reassigning the individual web elements to new properties. Okay, so that was the last little bit of demonstration that I wanted to show you. Let me go back to the presentation here. All right, so we cover the demos. And now I want to get into some additional resources for everyone. Here's a list that beginners should look to when they get started with API programming at FEMAP. The first is the API reference manual. Now this is a big document, and if you have any questions on the API whatsoever, I guarantee you the answer is in there somewhere. It's around 2,000 pages, and it's got a ton of detail, and yeah, if you do have a question, it's going to be answered by it. The other one I want to single out is Patrick Kring's series presentation on an introduction to FEMAP API, and this is a presentation he gave at the FEMAP 2014 symposium. This is an excellent resource. It's just a bunch of slides that are available online at the links there, and there's 2 links there for the 2013 and 2014 symposium presentations, and a couple other resources too that should help you get started. So of course SDA is also a Siemens PLM software channel partner, and as such we provide first-line support and training, so feel free to reach out to us through those means listed there. And lastly, I want to talk to you about a new FEMAP learning resource, and it's called Learning FEMAP. This is actually a book I've just put out that covers all of the basic steps of FEA with FEMAP, to include a relevant section on the basics of program files and API programming. So a couple of walkthroughs are included that provide further insight into API programming. And if you're interested in purchasing a copy, you can head over to the link in the upper left there, or you can email me directly. So I want to thank everyone for watching. At this time, we'll go over any questions that were sent during the webinar. All right, so the first question is, will all actions performed by an API script be undone by a single undo in FEMAP, including those run from Excel? I believe it will capture what you've done, and it will be able to undo anything that an API any actions an API is committed on the database. And I believe that would hold true with Excel as well. Not completely sure on that, but I believe so. Let's see. Does the programming window in FEMAP have the same debugging functionality as VBA normally does? Yes, there are certainly some options there for debugging. If I bring up the window again, if I run this, I'll be given the some options for adding watches, and then there's also another box that pops up. It'll allow you to basically enter a variable and watch how you can how the variable changes with as you step through the program. And there's a break bar here, so you can add in breaks to your programs as well, and that's really convenient for debugging. And there's a couple of step-through options up here as well. All right. Does your book have any examples of short and sweet API scripts like you demoed? I've got just a few in there. One grabs all elements. You can get the mass of any selected elements, and then account it by accounting for the scale factor. So if you've got all your masses or densities set up in your model, for example, where you've specified density in like flinches, as is common with English and U.S. units, and you want to immediately know what the mass is in pounds, and that's a simple script to do that. I've got that in there, and another one to quickly disable properties. So yeah, there are a couple small, simple scripts in there. Is the documentation of the API available from Excel? It's the same documentation that you'll want. The API reference manual is available in your FEMAP install directory under the, I believe, the PDF folder, and that's where you can find it. You would want to have that open as you program from either FEMAP or Excel. All right. Next question, when selecting a node set or output set with the .next command, is there an easy way to reset that pointer? And I believe that's just simply .reset. That says you're stepping through like in a while loop, is when you would typically have that. That's where that question would come about, stepping through a bunch of IDs, say, in a set. Okay, and we'll wait another couple minutes to see if any other questions arise, so I'll stay on the line. Okay, we got a question. When running through Excel, does it require that FEMAP is already running? So you can actually create, and then the second question, what if more than one FEMAP instance is running? So the limitations of the COM-OLE interface mean that if you're going to connect to a currently running FEMAP session, it will pick up the latest one that was opened. But you can also create instances, you can open up new instances of FEMAP using a different code than what we showed today from Excel. In our example demo, we already had FEMAP open, so we used a particular code snippet at the top, and those are provided also in the API reference manual. And then would a basic book on Visual Basic help? Absolutely. It's always good to have a reference. I know at our office we're constantly using different resources such as programming guides, online guides, the API, and mostly the API reference manual. I think you can get pretty far with the API reference manual, but if you want to do more complicated things, then a separate book just on Visual Basic for applications would help. All right, if there's no more questions, then we'll go ahead and wrap up. It looks like we got one here. Okay, there are a couple questions here that we'll go ahead and address after the webinar is completed. We'll contact you via email, so look out for that, and thanks for joining us today. Thank you, everyone.